Joseph Schmitz is a former Inspector General for the Department of Defense, and he's a neocon, and he's a conservative activist, and he has worked with former CIA officials and other conservative activists and former military officials to put together a report called, quote, Sharia, the Threat to America. So they're very, very concerned about the Sharia law being applied in the United States. They don't want that. They think it's a huge threat. It's interesting, though, because after Schmitz left the Department of Defense, first place that he went to go work for is Blackwater. It's probably not surprising. He was their general counsel. So it's the revolving door in D.C. and in the Pentagon. You work at Defense, you work at CIA, and the next thing you know, well, you look at that, you're at Blackwater trying to get contracts from the American government, which they did. But in those contracts, sometimes they screwed up. And in one particular case, there was a helicopter crash, and family members of a U.S. troop who was killed sued Blackwater, saying that they were negligent in that case. And in fact, there was incredibly strong evidence to say that they were. The U.S. Army Collateral Investigations Board said that the crew run by Blackwater suffered from degraded situational awareness, inattention and complacency, poor judgment, and willingness to take unacceptable risks. But they weren't even done. They went on to also say that they had inadequate cross-checking and crew coordination, and that Blackwater's pilots were, quote, behaving unprofessionally and were deliberately flying the non-standard route low through the valley for, quote, fun. Okay? So what Blackwater did was disastrous, and it wound up getting one of our troops killed. This goes to court, and guess what Joseph Schmitz, who is now the general counsel for Blackwater, argues? He argues in American court that Sharia law should be applied. I'm not kidding. The guy who helped write the report on what a threat Sharia was to America asked the U.S. court to have it applied. You got to be wondering why. Well, he says, well, look, this crash happened in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is, does Sharia law, applies Sharia law. Since it happened in that jurisdiction, we should also impose Sharia law here. Why? Because under Sharia law, the company will not be held responsible. So the only guy in the country actually asking for Sharia law to be applied in the United States of America is the guy who helped write the report, Sharia, the Threat to America. These conservatives are awesome. They're awesome in their hypocrisy. By the way, I should give credit to the guy who did this. Jeremy Scahill is the guy who wrote about this, of course, been following Blackwater best of any of the reporters. In fact, let me just tell you the last part of the story. It's just that Scahill makes a great comment. He's like, of course, when Blackwater killed 17 innocent civilians in Nisour Square in Iraq, shockingly enough, they did not ask for Sharia law to be applied, right? So, of course, they only want Sharia law when it is to their advantage. But, you know, it's another thing that, you know, that we talk about all the time, projection, right? So they're saying, oh, you got to watch out for Sharia law, because they're the ones who want Sharia law applied. And by the way, some of those guys who also wrote that report, people like Lieutenant General William Jerry Boykin, are deeply fundamentalist. So they want their version of Sharia law, Christian Sharia law, to be applied in the U.S. So the whole thing is one giant projection.